Good morning. For those of you who don't know, Silicon Lakes is a very early stage tech startup incubator. We only launched last year, and our focus is on digital startups, so software, web and apps. It's been an interesting experience. The Gold Coast ecosystem is certainly very different in our space to Sydney or Melbourne. Every time I go down to a Melbourne event or a Sydney event, I come back a little depressed, but also motivated at the same time. I'm going to talk about GovHack, which is a really boring open data event, but there's a reason why I'm telling you guys about it today. But before I do, I just want to touch on some of the things that the panel said, particularly around the failure aspect. We don't allow people to fail. And interestingly, in the bio that was just read out about me, none of my failures are actually on there. I've had 4 businesses fail, and we don't talk about those. And so one thing we do, every Tuesday morning, we have a startup breakfast group over at Silicon Lakes. And it's more a training type environment for startup methodologies, but it always ends up in a conversation around the different startups at the table. And the most valuable part of that conversation is when we talk about the failures. So we're actually putting forward this idea in our group of, let's have a breakfast where everyone gets up and only talks about their failures. Certainly I've learned more from my failures in business than from the ones that succeeded. I actually learned far more lessons out of that. And I think if we celebrate those failures, we encourage people to actually get up and have a go. So I really took that point home from the panel, and I think it's a very valid point. So GovHack. So GovHack is a national event that takes place the first weekend in June, so June 1st and 2nd. It's happening in all the capital cities, and the Gold Coast is the only regional city to be also running the event, so it's simultaneous around the country. We put our hand up because it's an opportunity for the Gold Coast to basically punch above our weight and actually show that we have some talent here. I think the ecosystem is building, and we need to run these sort of events to help build that ecosystem. Why are we running it? I mean, open data gets a lot of publicity. It's in some cases now, it's becoming a boring topic. So open data is this sense of putting all these government data sets out there in the public forum so that we can create smart ways of interacting with government using that data. So some good examples from overseas, there was, for example, a boring data set from a Japanese council which had every location where a particular type of tree or plant was planted. Of itself, what use is that information? Someone turned it into an app where they can actually, as they walk around the city, depending on the season, they can actually predict pollen patterns. So if you have allergies, you can actually avoid certain parks or parts of the city to avoid an allergic reaction or reaction to the pollen. It's just one example. There's lots of better ones as well for NGOs and that sort of thing. Obviously, from the government perspective, it's all about, well, the public can probably do this better. They don't have deep pockets to do this. So it's a very cheap way for government to actually get some applications written for their data. But more importantly, it's about the programmers. So for here on the coast, the reason we put our hand up to run it is we want to drag all these programmers out of their bedrooms and their basements and actually get them together in a room. So the other thing I took from the panel was that collaboration aspect. I think that's critical, particularly with programmers. Every time we hold an event, there's more and more programmers arrive that we've never met before, who never knew that we existed and never knew that 2 guys down the road existed and they're working on a similar thing. I think it's critical that we all get behind these sort of events that pull these people together. That's why this breakfast is fantastic. We need more of this in the programming geeky world as well, particularly on the coast. If we look at, like, why is this important? To touch on something Clarence discussed in one of his slides is this concept of dematerialisation. Everything in the physical world is going into the digital world. And 3D printing is one example of that. 3D printing is going to give us the ability to order online and have physical objects delivered to our room with no delivery vehicle in between. So you'll order shoes and they'll be delivered via email that you then print on your 3D printer. And take that to a larger scale, the post office becomes a large-scale 3D printer and you're going there to collect your furniture. This has massive implications in terms of intellectual property, in terms of warehousing, in terms of logistics and trucking. There's 1 million Australians employed in trucking. Now, if that industry was wiped out, that's a massive disruption. So everything is heading to this digital world, and the problem is we don't have enough IT professionals. So PwC did a report recently. We're outputting as a nation, I think 2% of our graduates are in ICT. The graph of programming-related jobs is like this, and the graph of programmers coming out of facilities is like this. So we need to bring this line up to match it. I think by 2020, the value of that difference is in the billions. So there's a massive opportunity there globally. let's bring up the line of programmers, and let's also work on bringing up the line of programmers that are required as well. Certainly in the Gold Coast tech space, we struggle to find tech co-founders. We have lots of startups, lots of guys come up with ideas for things out of their industry or their background, but they actually have no technical knowledge whatsoever. And it's a big stumbling block. How do we scale this innovation if we don't have the means to execute it? And the reality of that is most people then go and outsource. They send it off overseas for development. We need these local programmers. So that's what this event is about. The format of the event, basically people come in on a Friday night. There's a little bit of a live feed over to Canberra. There's some basically team forming that'll happen on the Friday night. And the idea is that then all go away, look at the open data sets, come up with some product they're going to build around that, execute it, and then pitch it to a panel of judges on the Sunday night. There's some significant cash prizes just locally on the Gold Coast. There's about $15,000 worth of prizes, and nationally there's about another $40,000 worth of prizes. So there's some big money on the table for the local startup community. The event's obviously catered towards programmers, but we want to put a bit of a spin on it. We don't want just programmers to come along. We'd like all different sorts of designers and other areas of technical skill, but also non-technical people. We see it all the time in startup events where the contribution from the business community or people with different backgrounds in that collaborative environment is just fantastic. So we're actually encouraging anyone to attend, even on the programmer side, regardless of skill set. So we don't just want seasoned programmers and developers in there. We want maybe young guys at school or at uni who may not have the experience. It's an opportunity for them to come in and learn about the process and learn from the more experienced guys as well. So I've already mentioned the date and where it's going to be located. Basically running out of our premises on the 31st of May. And I guess the reason I'm pitching it here today is just to get your help. So we need your help dragging the programmers out and finding them and getting them into one room to all work together. Promoting the event, and if any of you also want to attend as mentors or judges, regardless, like I said, of the technical background and skill, that'd be great. One other thing I'll just drop in, I'm only going to be brief, but the other thing that we're trying to do different about this event, so nationally this event is focused on the outcome is an app or a new data analytics tool or an API. The outcome for us is actually to carry it forward with the teams and the people. So we're actually putting up a couple of prizes which are to go through our incubator program. And that it won't necessarily be for the best product that comes out of the event, but perhaps the best team. And we want to also run some workshops at the event. So rather than it just being focused on programming, we'll have some commercialization workshops. We'll drag in an IP lawyer or two to actually talk about issues like that. So these guys that are coming to the event can get more out of it than just a product at the end or potentially a prize. We'd like to see it continue forward. The last thing I'll just pitch as well is we also have a startup weekend coming up in July. Now, startup weekend is similar format to GovHack, however, it's about business ideas and commercialisation of those ideas. The idea with the event is you come in on Friday night, pitch an idea, a team forms around your idea, you then spend the weekend either developing the product in some cases, some teams go out and get revenue, they actually find customers, and then they pitch it to judges on the Sunday night. The startup weekend, it's an international event driven out of Seattle and Silicon Valley. It now runs on any given weekend, there's about 12 events running around the world. It doesn't have to be just for tech ideas, so the idea is it can be any sort of innovative idea. These events are typically very successful. They draw about 160 people, and we'd like to see out of those events, we actually carry the ideas forward. So typically these events sort of finish on the Sunday night, everyone's excited, they go home and then nothing happens. We'd like to carry them forward with mentoring and incubation of the ideas. That's everything I want to talk about today, but thanks very much for inviting us along.